Hey everybody, KC here. So I recently had the opportunity to meet a guy named Alan Ying. And Alan Ying is a guy who, I don't know, 20 years or so ago, he was a resident in cardiac thoracic surgery at Duke University. And he decided to give that up after having invested an enormous amount of time and money in becoming a surgeon because what he really wanted to do is he wanted to be a technology entrepreneur. And he's been tremendously successful. But one of the things he's really interested in is the notion of risk, because that was a risk when he did it. And he has co-written a book called The Risk Paradox, Life Lessons from 102 Amazing Risk Takers. He co-wrote it with Doug Schneider. And in it, they talk to a lot of different people who have taken risks in their careers for a variety of reasons. Not everybody takes risks for the same reasons. Some people are propelled by inner motivation. Some people have to take risks because that's the circumstances they find in. Really, really interesting book, fascinating anecdotes. Really can learn a lot from it. But I wanted to find out more. I wanted to find out how he and his businesses sort of institutionalizes risk taking. How does he evaluate it? How does he evaluate the people in his companies that take risks? How does he encourage them to do it? So I sat down, I did a Zoom interview. So I hope you will enjoy my conversation with the co-author of The Risk Paradox, Alan Ying. Alan Ying, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, listen, great book. It's called The Risk Paradox, Life Lessons from 102 Amazing Risk Takers. They're co-author with Doug Schneider. So one of the things that immediately grabbed me when I was reading the book was the line that taking a risk is actually the least risky thing you can do to live a fulfilling life. And I would imagine that also applies to business. If you want to have maximizing your potential or your fulfillment through your business, it's incredibly important to take risks and not play it safe. Is that fair?
That is fair. I would say the key thing with this, to clarify for everyone is, this isn't about being reckless and just going off half-cocked. It's all of us reach risk decisions with whatever level of experience or knowledge we have. We get to as much as we can know about a decision, and then it still feels risky. It feels like it could go sideways, it could go up, it could go down. And after we've worked as hard as we can in business, you just don't know what's going to happen. And, in business, there's things you can track, dollars and cents and time. So what I'd say is, over the long run, what we found in the research with, a lot of them, the vast majority were entrepreneurial and business related. The risks were, even the failures, what they would call the near-term failures, or where they lost money or it didn't work out like they thought. Those were the big points that catapulted them forward to success in their life.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about it's not about being reckless. I had a friend of mine who was a stuntman for the movies. And he used to say, I'm not a daredevil. I'm the most careful person you're ever going to meet, but I know how to gauge the risks and prepare for them. But he says, I am not a daredevil. So I think it sounds like it's very much the same thing.
Yeah, a lot of when we wrote this book, the start of it was Doug is self-described as, my co-author is not a risk taker, and he would always ask me. He was always very stunned about what he perceived as incredible risks and crazy things I'd done with my career and life. And I wasn't trying to be coy or disingenuously humble. I just didn't see it like that. And the funny thing was, going through and interviewing all these people where I'm on the outside and I look at what they've done, and it's like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. How did you? It was the same thing. They would say, look, I didn't see it as a big risk. A lot of times it was, I was betting on myself, or I was going to learn either way. Or the risk was not if I did make this decision. It's, what if I didn't take this decision? What was I risking then? So that was an interesting revelation from having all these 100 risk takers offset against what my experience and what I thought.
Yeah. Well, and in the book you refer to it as in all the cases or most of the cases, but certainly in your cases having kind of a moment of truth where you have, it's the, which road am I going to take? Give us some background. Talk a little bit about your moment of truth. You were a cardio-thoracic surgeon and decided after I can only imagine how much education went into that, decided to do something else.
Yeah, it was $400,000 of education, as it turns out, which I had to pay. So, in a lot of years. I always tell people it's funny, I've agonized more over much smaller decisions. The moment of truth there, I had been burning the candle at both ends, working full time as a resident in the cardiothoracic surgery program at Duke. I was doing very well. And I'd won the Intern of the Year award that was voted on by all the nurses at Duke Hospital. And I was working on this software startup, and I could feel that if I couldn't give full time to it, it was going to die. And I could feel if I tried to give any more time to it, I was going to start performing not up to my standards as a surgery resident. And that was really the time where I just sat with myself. And I was married. I remember asking my wife, if I do something crazy, how much notice do you need? And she said, I need 6 months. And so 6 months before that, I told her, I said, I don't know what's going to happen with this startup. We could go out of business next week. We don't have any money, but I don't know if I could do both things. So I considered that my 6 month notice. And then it was a huge.
Did she consider that your 6 month notice?
She did. Because I'd planted the seed. Okay. And so, but it's a 7-year commitment. When you're at Duke, it's a big deal when you go and you are a heart surgeon, because that's where the textbook for heart surgery is written. And I sat in a room and I thought, what would I regret when nothing else matters anymore? When I have kids and I'm healthy and I'm older and I'm 90 years old sitting in a rocking chair. I call that sitting in the rocking chair. And what it did was it put me in my moment of truth, in a place where I was safe and I knew it was all going to work out. And if I was looking back, what would I want to have happened? And I said, if I'm a world famous cardiothoracic surgeon and I know I didn't try this, would I regret it? And I said, yeah, I would. And I said, if I leave and I fail miserably and I'm tail between the legs and this goes kaput, am I going to regret that? And I said, no. And that was literally the 5-minute conversation I had with myself. And then after that, I knew that the best of the worst and widest possible scenarios of outcomes, I was going to be fine with either. And it was this decision that was going to yield regret. So that was my moment of truth.
Has there ever been a moment where you second guessed yourself?
No, it's so funny with all of these risk takers, and I don't want to say like I have some, heroic level of self-assuredness or anything like that. It could all just be psychological, defensiveness or shielding myself. But what I'd say is it's never crossed my mind. People always ask me, do I miss the medicine? Do I miss the surgery? I loved it. I was working 120 hours a week. It was saving lives. I loved it. But I tell people, I said, look, the closest I can get to this is, yeah, I miss it, but I miss it like a really great friend from college that used to sit around in the hallway and eat pizza together and have a few beers and talk about life. I don't know if I'd hang out with that person every day now. I don't know if they're the same person now, but I miss them, from 30 years ago. So yeah, I miss it, but I haven't second guessed it. And that was very, very consistent across the founder from DirecTV to 1-800-GOT-JUNK to Jazzercise, to all these different businesses. Regret was not a big deal for them. they made sure they avoided it.
And that moment of truth, or that, what the line, I feel like I have to do this. That seems to be a commonality, right? People feeling like in some way, shape, or form, they they just really didn't have any choice.
Yeah, well, there were some that were survivors. Like if you read the book, there are six
Yeah.
kinds of risk takers, right? There's the adrenaline junkie. There's six different types. There's some who just
Right.
survive and they have to get through. What I'd say is the have to part would be like, it was really heartwarming, honestly, in this age of kind of risk and kind of being true to yourself and everything else. These people who are, we had people who are in their 30s to 80s being interviewed who'd done incredible things. A lot of them, they had to do it once they realized it was the right thing for them.
Mhm.
And that was the courage, I think, because not all of us, and me included, I think everyone in their life, you grow up of making decisions um, that maybe you're not sure of what's right for you, and you make it, and then afterwards you're like, that was the wrong decision. Once they became sure that it was right for them, they went after it.
You mentioned the thing about people who were older who you talked to. There was a line that in the book that I thought was really interesting. I want you to talk about how risk tastes different with age.
I use that all the time. I tell people this all the time. I'm older now. I started my business, over 20 some years ago. I was brand new, had never taken a business class, had never opened a spreadsheet, was starting a startup, during the dot-com crash. And I had 300 venture capitalists tell me that it was like, angels, people, either it was a dumb idea or a stupid idea for a business. And, or I didn't know what I was doing. And I was a lot of people mentioned it, I was too young, too energetic to kind of take no for an answer. I tell people this all the time. I still take risk with my businesses. I'm in retail and supply chain in one of my businesses now, a capital intensive business. But I tell people all the time, if I came to me now with who I was back then, I'd say the same thing. This is a terrible idea. Of course, I'm not going to invest in you.
So when you hire people to run because you can't run all of your businesses, so you're clearly hiring people. Are you looking specifically for risk takers all the time? Are you looking for risk takers for certain roles, but not for other roles like accountants? I mean, how do you gauge that when you're talking to people who are going to be running businesses in which you're investing money and there are other people investing their money as well?
Well, that is a terrific question. Um, I am only looking for temperament. I'm basic competencies, skills, but a lot of is temperament, uh, curiosity, self-awareness. Um, Risk, I will say, risk appetite. Okay. That's difficult to assess because I told you, like, the things that um, what I do now with the different businesses. I have several businesses. Some would say, oh my gosh, why would you start a business in that? Or why are you running a business in that field? Um, but I don't feel like I'm taking risks there that are unmanageable or they have low risk, high reward. Um, what I look for is temperament and the ability to kind of assess information, honestly, and a willingness to be wrong, a curiosity to know what's right. And then honestly, the risks kind of just come out of that. I had a management meeting this morning, and we were talking about uncertainties around production in China for Chinese New Year and supply chain, and a competitor with factories in Germany, and there's all sorts of uncertainty around natural gas and fossil fuel risk in producers in Germany, and there's lots of that. But when I assess the managers, it's about temperament. It's about I want them to have a lot of desire to be better. And when you want to be better, you're going to be curious, and you're going to be self-aware, and you're going to want to know as much as you can, but you're also going to know that you can't always be right. And maybe that's what assessing for risk is,
Yeah.
but that's what I
Well,
look for.
And the curiosity thing that it seems to me is really important. It's that willingness and that the willingness to learn, to kind of go into a situation and say, okay, I'm going to learn from this. And I think that, to me, that was one of the kind of through lines of the book that I thought connected a lot of the folks. They were, whether they were, I mean, your six kind of idealists, adventurers, liberators, survivors, seekers, and givers. Wherever they fit into that, they either felt compelled to learn, or certainly were willing to learn. To me, that is such an important element in it all.
Yeah, I mean, the recklessness in risk would be, not learning everything you can about the situation, and none of them were reckless. If you took the IMDb version of their lives, you would think, "Oh my gosh, this person's like a daredevil and they're doing incredible crazy things. That seems like I would never do that." And when you hear their stories and the situations, um they tried. It wasn't they weren't all like ready, fire, aim. They were trying, but we all get to the point where it's like, I know as much as I can, I've tried as hard as I could, and the future's still the future, and I don't know, and there's risk.
You talk a little bit about the emerging field of behavioral economics. So there's actually some economic theory behind all this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's one of the topics, you guys could listen to any podcast that you wanted to, that NPR does a bunch of really good ones. Behavioral economics, I'm a real fan around it. It's taking the soft stuff of psychology, the things we all feel around, loss aversion is one thing that you guys will hear about. Just type in loss aversion on, your podcast app, and you'll find plenty of podcasts about it. But it's people, the studies are that people feel their losses more negatively than the positives of their gains, right? And they've tried to assess kind of the reasons and the rationale and the magnitude, et cetera. But that was actually that was one thing that we didn't get to explore fully. I think it's something that is merits like academic exploration. They didn't dwell on their losses. These people who took the risk, and that was honestly unexpected. These 102 people who've done amazing things, they've had losses, and they didn't beat themselves up and dwell on it and kind of do the whole George Costanza, Seinfeld, beat yourself up forever after on something. That was really common and unexpected with these incredible risk takers.
It seems very much, and right now Amazon is sort of is not in a good place, or not certainly compared to its recent past. But that does seem very much like the Amazon sort of philosophy, which is you take a shot. I mean, you research it really, really well. You're able to explain it really, really well, but you're willing to take a risk. And if it doesn't work out, you walk away from it, and then you apply those learnings to other businesses, and understanding that there is no addition without some subtraction.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Bezos has scaled a lot of the soft things. So the 67% rule. So, I describe my rocking chair. That's, I'm not Jeff Bezos. He calls that the regret minimization framework. We're around the same age. So, convergent evolution, I guess. But he also, he has something that I use with my teams, which is the 67% rule, which is, as the owner or the head of the business, like institutionalizing, saying, look, anything above 67% information and knowledge and certainty, right, like that's a bonus, and that's great. Shoot for 100. Okay. But we can start making decisions at 67%. And that was kind of the institution. And I've since learned this, that Bezos had institutionalized this at Amazon, which is get 2/3 of the way there with information certainty, and then it's okay to like assess it and make a decision. That doesn't mean you need to pull the trigger. Then shoot, if you have time, shoot for 75, shoot for 80, shoot for 90. So I do that in my businesses, and it's been extraordinarily kind of on balance helpful.
How do you institutionalize that? How do you how do you frame that out so people understand? You say to me, we're going to build a house and we're going to stop and look at it when it's 67% done. I say, okay, that I understand. Not that I could build a house, but I understand conceptually what that means. How do you make create a
So this is how we do it. Okay.
Okay.
Bezos has these famous 6-page cases. Of course, which seems really short because he's a, multi-$100 billion business. I've always had 2-page cases. Okay. Typically it'll be 1 page or 2 pages, but if it's a big deal, we fit the analysis of what we want to do into a 2-page assessment. Okay. Now here's the thing. It doesn't mean 67, I don't know what that is, a D. It doesn't mean shoot for a D.
Right.
But time is a component and situational context is a component. Is a competitor doing something? Do we need to do this now?
Right.
Freight rates. You guys are in retail. People are gonna have to get from suppliers or maybe producers, and they got to negotiate and buy freight rates. And when are they gonna buy it? Well, they can't. I don't know. Maybe they can buy a call option or a put option on freight a year from now or whatever. But there is going to be a time component around decision making, and that'll be around context of what's happening in the world. So typically, what happens is I institutionalize it by not beating people up about it, where it's like, look, we're going to do the best we can, the most we can with what we have, and make the best decision we can. And we're going to work like hell, and the team's going to work like hell. They're going to assemble the information. And here's the thing. If we need to make a decision next week, let's gather as much as we can. Let's look at the case now and figure out where we sit and work on it. But I'm not going to fire anyone or kill anyone because there's a 30% chance of this is wrong, but we're going to make a decision to go that way because that's what the situation called for. So what I'd say institutionalizing it is actually saying it out loud to your team. And what that, and look, I'm not saying if I'm the VP and I have a CEO who's saying, I need you to be, are you 100% certain, right? If we all watch, I don't know if you, watch those shows with some caricature boss who's like, are you 100% sure?
Succession or Billions.
Yeah. Succession, right? Where it's like, you need to be 100%. Like it's, you can't be the VP and have the boss like demand that. I happen to be at the top, so I can say this and make it true, and then I'll act on it, and then they see the results. And then what it does is, one of my businesses, it started out at, when I was there and invested, it was 4 million. Now it's over 50 million. And it's a lot of false starts and failed exercises on different business lines. But you create an environment where it's okay.
I would imagine that it's also really important to know what the finish line looks like, but also know that it's worth taking the risk if you know what the finish line looks like, and you do have an instinctive sense of, even if nobody else is doing it and everybody thinks you're crazy, you have a sense of what it looks like. But you also have to be willing to accept the fact that when you get there, it may look different than you thought it was going to look like.
Yeah, the way I institutionalize that is it's actually, I find that it's easy for people to visualize the finish line.
Right.
What I do is, I talk about the next rock mentality, which is, I learned this from watching Navy SEAL documentaries and keynote speakers who are Navy SEALs. But, when you're caught behind enemy lines in Afghanistan and you think, oh, I need to get to, Germany, to the Air Force base in Germany, like what happens is people just collapse. They fail, like, because they can't conceive of that. Right. So what they do is in the SEALs, they institutionalize, okay, what is the next rock for me to get to? Okay. And get behind that rock, avoid fire, stay alive, get to the next rock. And you just string those together. And then that gives the highest yield to end up safely in the Army or the Air Force base in Germany. So the way I institutionalize it with everyone is it's actually a shortcut. It's easy to know kind of what we think the finish line is. What I push for is what's the next rock? And we make the decision on what's the next rock that'll advance us to the finish line. So that's how I do it, at least.
It's interesting. Apropos of nothing, I've interviewed a bunch of like former intelligence guys and a couple of Navy SEALs who have written novels. And I've discovered that they're all really good. And I suspect it ties into what you're saying. They're actually really good writers because they know how to tell a story. And part of it is because they understand that rock to rock to rock story, right? They've got to be able to tell a story to the people who report to them, who they're in command of, and they're really good at telling stories. And I have found that kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I would say the one benefit, I don't know your audience, what the scope of the people are. I've been really lucky. I started off, one guy in a milk crate and had to run eventually this big business. So I've played every position on the field because I had to.
Right.
What I found is it is helpful in business to describe the next rock. So it's been very natural for me with different businesses to talk about, okay, this is the situation. Let's get to the next rock. This is what that rock looks like. Okay. And that's where, staying in touch with operations and your people and kind of what actually goes on in the business is kind of like that intelligence officer. If that person was just sitting in an office and wasn't a field officer, then they couldn't tell that rock to rock story. It's just like in business. If you don't know what the people are doing and how the business flows, it's difficult to tell the next rock story to management.
You've been really generous with your time. Want to make sure I hold up the book one more time. It's called The Risk Paradox: Life Lessons from 102 Amazing Risk Takers. Alan Ying, Doug Schneider. My last question is this: do you know what your next risk is?
I think we're probably, across several of my businesses, there's probably going to be something that comes up with hiring and firing. That's always a tough one. Do you give people another chance? Do you hang on to them a little bit longer? And it's probably not even going to be my risk. It's going to be someone else's, but people decisions are hard. Capital allocation is a little easier. So it's probably going to be somewhere in those areas.
I lied. I have another question. Is it harder to take risks in this economic environment? Where there's inflation, people are worried about a recession. There's so much uncertainty out there. Is it harder to take risks at that time? And is it more necessary to take risks at this kind of time?
Yeah, I think, we didn't time it this way. We started this book probably like a few months before the pandemic happened. And then, the riskiness of the world based on uncertainty is laid bare to everyone. I actually feel like temperamentally, it's actually been helpful. I mean, it's a lot harder to predict the future and be right. But it's in some ways because that's so incredibly, obvious now. And the last several years have been so tough with predicting anything. It's temperamentally, I think, for a lot of people, like, when I talk about get to 67%, that was probably a harder sell. It wasn't a harder sell, but like,
yeah.
Now everyone's like, yeah, that's the best you could hope for. That's an A.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Listen, the book is great. I wish you the best of luck with it. And I appreciate your coming on Morning News Beat.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Take care.